Party Moses here again, back with the Department of the West. It is July 14th, 1861, and the Department of the West has just won its second major victory against the Confederates in southwestern Missouri at the Battle of Lebanon. So the Department of the West has retreated. We've gone to an encampment nearby here in Rolla, Missouri, and we've retreated back here mostly to connect ourselves back to the Rolla Depot. We want to really make sure that we get our supplies and all of our forage and ammunition back up to full strength before we continue campaigning. So before we get started, before I kind of go handle everything else that's happening back east, I just want to show, again, a little bit more about how the supply system works in this game. So we're going to turn the supply lines on, and you can see where Harney is drawing all of his provisions from. So we click once again on his army. We're getting most of our supplies straight down this rail line from St. Louis. We're getting quite a few that are coming in from Jefferson City. So the fact that that snapped over back to Union control after the Battle of Lebanon is a good thing for us, because it means that we can use the Missouri River as one of our main ways to get supplies. We're also getting quite a lot from Fredericton. So Fredericton is a town that we're going to have to really carefully watch for a couple of reasons. One, it's a supply point, right? This is where we're drawing provisions and forage and all sorts of things, but it also has lead mines. Lead mines are really important to the Union war effort, obviously. The fact that they're producing 98,000 pieces of lead is also like quite important for the Union war effort, right? This lead is actually going everywhere. We can actually look, if we click on this, we can see the goods flow. The way that the production of this lead is actually going right to Fredericton. And from Fredericton, it's being dispatched all around the Union, of course. So we can also see a couple of other somewhat grim things here. We've got a hugely available workforce, but we're also using enslaved labor. So this being a fairly directly abolitionist campaign, right? That's not something I'm super interested in. And if we get to a point where we abolish slavery and release the Emancipation Proclamation, it's worth taking a look again at the border states and how their labor is actually affected by the emancipation. But we'll see that a little bit later when we get to it. I just wanted to point out that the lead belt mines here are an important war resource, and it's something that Harney would have to be very conscious of defending against any incursions from the secessionists here in Missouri. So let's get back to our army a little bit, though. So again, we're drawing supplies from all around. These supplies are also going from St. Louis to this distributary, this supply dump over here. And we can see that between St. Louis and Rolla, we actually have 3 supply depots. And if we click on a supply depot, let's take a look at the Franklin Depot here, we can see a few things. So it's got all of these supplies in there, right? It's great. We've got 300 uniforms. We've got lots of small arms ammo. We've got lots of forage and artillery ammunition. But it costs $100,000 to keep it up, right? All of this stuff costs, all of it. So if we look over here at our level 2 supply depot, this costs $150,000, and it's much more well stocked, right? So this costs, a little bit more than this one, but we also have this third one down here. So all of the supplies that are going to these depots have to be distributed from St. Louis to 3 other supply depots. And that's just inefficient. And it costs money, right? But in this small area, just in terms of war materiel, not counting everything that our army is actually actively consuming, we're spending $350,000 to keep this up. So I want to get rid of one of these supply depots, and I'm going to take the Franklin Depot, even though it's more stocked, and I'm going to abandon it. So I want all of the goods flow to go from St. Louis down to Rolla, because this is farther into the sort of southwestern part of Missouri that is part of our active front line here, right? I want to keep that here. I'm not going to be operating around Franklin, and if I'm that close to St. Louis, I'm going to draw my supplies straight from St. Louis. So I'd rather have the Rolla Depot right here at the end of the rail line. And it's something I'm thinking about. I might even upgrade, because we might go through quite a lot of operations that are going to range all around St. Louis. So I'd rather have that there than anything else. But until then, let's take a look a little bit more closely at the army itself. So to look at our supplies, we want to look below the readiness bar, right here at the supplies, and we could get this huge info panel. Right next to that, we also get connected to depots. So it shows the depots that we're actually connected to and drawing supplies from. So the Rolla depot, its condition is 100%. The supply speed, the speed with which I'm getting supplies from the depot to the army, is 50%. And its average stock right now is quite low because we've drawn quite a lot of our material from it. Most importantly, though, refilling speed from the depot to our army is 60%, and its supply capacity, the number of men it can supply and keep in the field, is 60,000. So we're actually not really stressing too much of this supply depot at all at its height. But the supply, the depot still needs to be refilled, and all that stuff needs to come to our army after that anyway. But right now, luckily, we're in a pretty good supply spot. We are 100% staffed. We've got everything that we need. The speed of supply is 52%. We have plenty of ammunition. We still need more artillery ammunition, however. So I'm going to sit here for a little while longer because I'd like that to get back up at least to about 60% before I start campaigning. We also have provisions. This is what men eat. And we have forage, which is what animals eat. 97% forage, and looks like 100% provisions for the men. So that's all doing great. In terms of supply, all we need to do is collect and distribute them, and we'll be fully supplied and ready to go. But there's other things to concern ourselves with, including, again, like I've mentioned several times already, the dreaded Manpower Apocalypse. Let's take a look at Lion. If you recall from the last episode, Lion had about 1,700 men in his brigade, and he's lost 1,000 men. He has 727 active men, which is fairly low. We still have 2 days left for the Iowa Volunteers, and 2 more days left for the Illinois Volunteers. 2 days for the rest of these guys. So probably going to advance some time and see how they do. In the meantime, at least we've got Henry Halleck. He's got his 3,000 men, which we're going to use as drafts to replace especially Lion's men. We're going to do that in a moment, though. So let's just advance a couple of days of time, and let's hope that we're not interrupted by any crisis from the east. Oh, a new railroad line opens. Okay, let's pause this just for a minute. So I built the Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Chicago rail line. That was one of the very first things I did at the start of this campaign. So let's actually take a look at that, because this will somewhat impact what we're doing in this campaign. So let's take a look. So if we close this, close that, and click away from there. I'll zoom in so you can't see what's going on in the east. I want it to be mysterious. We look down at railroads. We can go down and find the MN, Minnesota, and Chicago rail line. When you click on it, it will show the whole rail. So Chicago goes all the way out up here, right? So this is connecting quite a few places way out here in Minnesota and Iowa back to Chicago. And now you might not think this is super duper important, especially for a campaign that's taking place down in Missouri, but it is quite important because if we zoom in along the line here, you're going to start seeing farms. We have a foundry. We've got forts and factories. We've got more farms, right? We've got many factories. We've got farms. We've got production facilities and all of these various things. So Prairie du Chien, these little towns, these are called in the nomenclature of the game an IIP, an important infrastructure point. And the rail line connects all of those IIPs not only to each other, but also to Chicago. So all of the goods that are flowing from, say, foundries, right? We're producing bronze, for instance. So if I click on the goods flow, right? Look at all where that bronze is going or is coming from. It's coming into here. And it should be flowing out, right? So we can do the same with iron. Right? All of this is coming into this foundry from the rail lines and from the rivers. So I feel like it should be going the other way, right? The goods should be flowing out from the manufacturing, because that is what they're producing. That's what they're selling, right, in the nomenclature of this. But it's got it a little bit backward, or I'm reading it wrong. But in any case, this rail line is connecting them pretty importantly, right, from way the hell up here all the way down to Chicago. And from Chicago, they're going to be packed up and shipped to the rest of the country. So that's really important. It's also really important that we've got a rail line that goes all the way up here to the end point of Lake Superior, and to the town they call Superior, and Duluth. That's the port. So that's really important, and that's going to actually increase. It's going to make our economy function a little bit more smoothly. Now, I'm not quite ready to sort of get into the weeds with how the economy actually functions. Suffice to say that this being completed before even the end of the summer of 1861 made for a really interesting, a really good choice, I think, right at the beginning of the game, because it's going to mean all of this important stuff is going to flow out of Chicago, and eventually it'll flow down here to Missouri, where I'm going to turn it into bullets and food for my men, and, you know, obviously the inevitable Union victory. So that's great news. That's actually really excellent news, and I'm glad that we were able to complete that rail line. So once again, let me zoom in on the Department of the West here, advance forward a couple of days. Just want to get to July 16th, and then we're going to take a look at our Manpower Apocalypse. Okay, so Lyon, he's lost his men. And now Iowa, we haven't actually lost too many. Our volunteers ticked over, and we still got about 2,000 men in that brigade. The Illinois Brigade lost a few hundred. Remember, Sylvester Churchill was the guy who got absolutely hammered in the last battle. It looks like he's lost a little bit less than half of his men. 1st Indiana, similarly, staying pretty high. That's pretty good. I think 1,800 men is perfectly fine brigade size. And the Illinois regiment, the Illinois Brigade, again, has come down to just over 1,000 men. But I do have these two replacement brigades that I brought in, each one almost 2,000 men strong. So I'm going to use these to reinforce my existing brigades. And I've already talked about it a little bit in the last video. And some people kind of look at this as being somewhat of a kind of an exploit. But again, the way that procurement of men worked, this kind of thing happened actually pretty frequently. So if we really want to, we can just sort of, you know, we could even call this the 3rd Missouri if we wanted to, rather than the 1st Missouri, because technically this is a reconstituted regiment. It's a reconstituted brigade made of 3 or 4 reconstituted regiments, but I don't think we really need to get into it. It's just Lyon's Brigade, and I'm going to click and drag Halleck, and I'm going to drag him up here to, it says combine units, and I'm going to release. And now Halleck has 737 men, and Lyon has almost 3,000. So he's back up to full strength. Now, a couple things that can get lost in the noise here, right? We want to make sure that that didn't actually damage the morale or fighting power of this brigade. I'm going to pause time there too. Sometimes it can do that, right? If you take a morale or a draft of draftees, right, of conscripts, and force them into a volunteer brigade, that might actually drag their morale down. So we want to look at the morale here and just see what possibly affected it. So he's got 79.3 morale. That's okay. That's not bad. And it's going up. The morale recovery is plus 21.9%. So generally it's going up, and our morale is capped by our fighting spirit, which right now is at 100% because we're on friendly territory. So we want to kind of keep an eye on that the whole time as we're going through and reconstituting our brigades here. So of these two brigades, right, the 1st Iowa is doing just fine, right? They've got almost 2,000 men. Let's take a look at their morale first, though. We have to close this again, and then we have to come and look. So their morale is eager. They're at 100%. So they're doing just fine. And I want to double check before I use my draftees in the 1st Illinois and take a look at the morale of Sylvester Churchill here. So their morale is 14.3% because they broke and ran in the last engagement, and they don't like their commander. They're unhappy with their commander. He's been defamed because of the results of the last battle. So they're getting a negative 3.8% drain on their morale, which means every single battle will always start with them being no higher than about 96% morale, which 96% is perfectly good, right? It's really good. But we want to make sure we try to get that up. So I can make a choice here, right? We could say at the end of the contract term for this brigade of Illinois troops, that they've decided to vote out Sylvester Churchill as their commander. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into Manage Army. I'm going to take Churchill, and I'm going to replace him with somebody else. And I'm going to change their uniforms, and I'm going to put Halleck's replacements into buffer their numbers up, right? Because they still do have a pretty good portion of their experience down here filled out. They've almost got half of it toward a perk. And I want to keep that. I want to make sure that they retain those skills and that experience. So what I'm going to do is basically, in the fiction of this narrative campaign, I'm going to say that the troops of these brigades have elected new officers, and in doing so, they have voiced their support. The colonels of the regiments that make up the brigade have voiced their disapproval of Sylvester Churchill, even though it was me that put him in the position that broke him in the first place, and we're going to replace Churchill with somebody better. So, when you want to replace an officer, you press replace, and it brings up this panel. This is all of the officers in the army that right now are unassigned. There's various filters I can put down. There's all sorts of sorting things we could do: seniority, experience, ranking, age. We can select if we want infantry leader, if we want artillery, if we want somebody who's a West Pointer, a political volunteer, or a political appointee or a volunteer, anything like that. So what I'm going to do is, I don't really care whether they have experience or if they come from a professional or political or volunteer background. I'm going to deactivate all. I want to find Illinois. And I'm going to see what officers are available from Illinois. So first we've got Ulysses S. Grant, who actually has a terrific stats. He's a really good choice if we want to make him a brigade leader. The thing is, right now he's only a captain, so there's a possibility that if we make him a brigadier general, he might lose some of those points. It's not likely, but it might. But also, he's so good that we might want to retain him for something more important later. I would like to make Grant at least division commander, if not a corps commander, when it comes to reorganizing the forces out here in the West. So I'm going to skip over Grant for now, but let's take a look at James Morgan. He's doing okay. He's got a total of, let's see, 7 points here. What about John McClernand? He's famous, but his stats are not super good. His stats are also not good. All right, William H.L. Wallace, looking pretty promising. 3 stars of leadership. He's only got 1 point of fame, which is going to count against him. And going from lieutenant to brigadier general is going to be a big jump. So let's take a look at some other options first. John MacArthur, Thomas Sweeney. This guy looks pretty cool. David Stewart, Ezra Taylor. Political guy, John Turchin. Philip Post, Luther Bradley. John Palmer, famous but low stats. And you could basically just go through this with anyone you like, right? Now, you don't always need to pick the person with the best stats all the time, because they will become better over time. They will just improve naturally if the unit is handled well on the battlefield. They'll get a lot of benefit from having been handled they'll get a benefit from having been handled skillfully. So I'm probably going to go over here with William H.L. Wallace. I'm going to assign him as the brigadier commander, and this panel sometimes borks it up a little bit. It's because it's looking for something in Illinois because I've got the filter on, but it jumped to Florida for some reason. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to close that panel, bring back the Department of the West. And now I've got first Illinois and their new commander, William H.L. Wallace, and I'm going to change their uniform too. I'm going to say that once they've reconstituted themselves, they got a fancy new coat. It's Prussian blue, and they're going to look real smart now with this kind of professional looking Iron Brigade style uniform. So they look pretty sweet. I like them. Now before I fill up their brigade with replacements, I want to go back down to this menu, which, forgive me, it's a little clunky. Their morale is still quite low. However, we've gotten rid of the unhappy with their commander trait. So right now, they're perfectly pleased with Colonel H.L. Wallace. So right now, they're not unhappy, but they have just been brutally crushed. And so if we were to enter into a battle right now, they would likely start the battle broken. That might happen in the course of the rest of this campaign. So who knows? Keep an eye out for it. But I'm going to try to keep an eye on all of these things as I go too, because I'd like my army to enter into battle as prepared as possible all the time. So in any case, they're going to have to take some time for their morale to recover, but they do like their commander, at least for now. So I'm going to keep that in mind, 14.3% happiness. I'm going to drag Halleck and the rest of his 700 men up on top of Wallace. They're at about 1,800 now, perfectly strong brigade, and I want to take one more look at their morale and see if anything changed. And it didn't. So using these brigades, these new brigades, as sort of draft brigades to reconstitute brigades that have been broken up by casualties or because of reenlistment type stuff, isn't really going to have a severe impact on the performance of the brigade at all. But it might have, let's take a look and see. No, it even kept their experience counted toward the perk. This is something that I would almost expect that the developers might take a look at later. It might be something that they adjust here and there. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, but for right now, it works perfectly fine. So there you have it. So our first division here under Sumner is reconstituted back to nearly its full strength. It's not entirely full strength, but it's getting there. It's doing pretty well. We've got some pretty good commanders in charge of the brigades, and Sumner is doing just fine as a commander. Though he's not the greatest. We might try to find different roles for some of these guys in the future. Let's check out our second division under Cook. So we've got Hatch, again 1,800, and we've got 1,200 from the 2nd Illinois. They're now down to the starting of their 24-month contracts. And I'm going to take the 4th Brigade under Benjamin Bryce, and once again, I'm going to refill the units here. Okay, we've got some extra men. So the choice you have at this point is whether you want to try to... I still have men who are under strength over here. I can put those in there, or I can shuffle this guy off, and I can click this button here, which says replenish unit. So essentially what I would do is furlough these guys. They'd go back home and everything, and they'd do some recruiting, and within a few months they'd come back with much more of their soldierly complement back in the ranks, rather than just sort of languishing away as a 300-man brigade here in the Department of the West. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to use them, and I'm going to fill up our last week unit here, and I'm going to put some more men under Wallace over there. So we've got 5 quite strong infantry brigades at this point, and it's looking like we also lost some of the men from our artillery. So that's something we're gonna have to pay attention to as well. So we've gone down. We've got 116 men still serving 16 guns. That's pretty impressive. 100 men still serving 16 guns. So we'd like to get more men in there. And the thing you'll see is I can't take infantrymen, and I can't refill the Missouri Light guns here with infantry. I would have to do it with other artillery units. And similarly with my cavalry. So Ben Grierson has only lost a few hundred men. He had about 1,500 at the end of the last battle, and he's only lost a very small portion of his men. So he's still at about 1,000, and we're going to wait until we get our replacement brigade under Doubleday in 5 days, and we're going to refill his stock of units here too. But there might be some other bigger changes coming to the Department of the West in the near future, but for now, I think I'm going to let them rest and recollect and get their supplies in order. And I'm going to head over and check out and see what's happening over on the east, and we'll return back to the Department of the West when the time comes. And before we get into some of the other changes and some of the other news from around the country, I want to take the time to introduce a few things about how the economy works after the 1.06 patch. Now, this is the version of the game that I'm playing on is the 1.06 patch. Currently in beta, there's a 1.07 patch, which quite a few other YouTubers are playing campaigns of right now, if you want to kind of get an idea of some of the changes that are upcoming. But I figured I'm going to stick with the most stable release that's out right now, which right now is 1.06. That introduced major changes to the game, and a lot of them have to do with the economy. So I'm going to take you through a couple of the nitty-gritty aspects of the new changes of the economy and show you a little bit about how they work. Now, before we get into them, I'm not going to be able to give you any quick or easy answers about many of the problems that you'll encounter in your own campaigns. But what I can do is point you towards some of the solutions, some of the ways you can think about trying to solve the problems introduced by the economy. So the first thing we should take a look at is this little thing up here. It says economy alerts. You can see how large this page is, right? This is a lot of information, and it's a lot of production shortages. So we have right under economy alerts, we have production shortages, of course. We're not producing nearly enough coffee. We're producing 1/6 the amount of coffee that is desired, which sounds about right. We're not producing a lot of cotton. We're not producing a lot of crops. We're not producing a lot of fish. So we have tons and tons of sort of shortfalls to work up on. But we want to focus on the things that we can solve and the things that our economy is sort of rigged up to do. So for one thing, coffee, we can only import it. And the only way that we can import more of it is by upgrading our ports, which costs a ton of money. It's probably not the best use of our money at this point. And of course, because we're focusing here on the Western theater, what I want to try to do is aim at things that we can solve around the West. And we'll use Chicago as the place to kind of start and sort of look at maybe what we can solve that way, right? So if you look down past all of the production shortages, you can look at ineffective companies. We've got foundries in Pennsylvania. We got Harrisburg Foundries in Pennsylvania. Both of those are losing more than $1 million. We've got the Jones, McElwain and Company in Missouri, which is losing $1 million. We've got the Cumberland Furnace in Tennessee, losing almost $1 million, and the Chicago Foundry in Chicago, Illinois, which is losing almost $1 million as well. So if we zip over to Chicago here, we can go locate the foundries. Here are the Chicago Foundries, Union. We can click on them. We can see everything that they're doing, which at this point is nothing, and that might just be because we haven't run time quite yet. But we can also look at this little exclamation point that it has right next to it, which says economy alarm. We click on, or we can hover over this, and it'll give another information panel. And it says that the cost of pre-goods for this company are $1.9 million, while the produced goods are worth approximately $1.4 million. So we have a $500,000 difference between the cost of producing everything that we need and the money that we make from the production. So we have a $500,000 shortfall to make up for in this particular company. So when we're looking at this, right, the next kind of sentence tells us a little bit more about what we might need. So we're paying a lot for copper ore. We're paying a lot for iron ore. They're bought at high prices. And it gives us a little bit of a recommendation. Try to build companies that increase the pre-goods supply. Low market prices of bronze are weighing in on the company's revenue. Try to increase transport capacity in this area to increase goods transmission by constructing markets or railroads. Now, in the last episode, you saw that we actually have already completed a nearby railroad. We've got the not the Chicago and Cairo, that already exists. We have the Minnesota and Chicago Railroad, which we've just completed, right? So we're already increasing sort of transport capacity into Chicago. That's already happening, and that's pretty great. So that's not something that we should really worry about all that much. And we can also see that we have a market already built up around here. And if you look around on the map, you see this port here has this little upvote, right? That actually shows that the market has an influence on all of the company's IIP's transport elements that are around this area are being sort of boosted up by their proximity to this market. So one thing we could do is upgrade the market, and that should also increase the bonus that we get from the transport, from the marketplace being around there. And what this does is it sort of abstracts the idea that there's a lot of people bringing a lot of goods in and out of Chicago, and having a market means that more people coming in here will make the goods flow more efficient. It'll regularize, the roads and the rails and all that other stuff, so that goods will kind of come and go more efficiently. And that'll kind of give a net bonus effect to everything around the area. And we can look at one of the map filters here. I'm going to run time a little bit first, because sometimes these filters don't quite work unless you're actually actively kind of moving. So here we go. So I'm going to put market influences here, right? You see this big red bloom? That's the Chicago market acting up on all of these little elements over here, right? And again, you can see the little uptick on some of the Chicago Harbor here especially is getting a bonus. And if we click on that, we can find it. Come on, there we go. We can click on that, right? We can come down and we can see lack of means of transport affects network transport capacity by minus 12.4%, but the market that we have nearby increases it by 50%. So we have a net somewhere up in the upper 30s. Transport capacity is increased because of the market. So one option to maybe help deal with the Chicago Foundry's profit problem here is to increase the transport capacity by upgrading our market. So if we hover over upgrade here, we see that upgraded this building for $6 million, $5.9 million. And we'll also make the fixed costs rise by 50,000 per year also. It's expensive. It's a lot of money. It's also money that would come directly out of my current budget, which right now I only have $19 million available. I have a very high interest rate. I've got below average wealth in my economy, but we are expanding. It's, we're not in the worst possible place. I would really like to get the interest on my credit down. So I'd like to not spend a whole ton of money right away. I've been spending a lot of money on my military. I've been spending a lot of money getting soldiers in the ranks and getting weapons for them. So right now, I would like to not spend cash in my budget, if at all possible. I'd like to get my interest rate under control, and I'd like my credit rating to go up. And there's other ways we can deal with that as well. But for right now, again, I want to focus just on the problems of the Chicago foundries here. So the other thing it said is to build companies, or possibly upgrade companies, make companies more efficient, that produce the pre-goods that this company uses to manufacture things. So once time has rolled a little bit, we can actually see what it consumes and what it produces. So it says it consumes, right, these little red things, it buys 26,000 pieces of iron ore and 1.8 thousand pieces of copper ore. That comes in to this company that they turn into iron and bronze. So we can get more information about this too. Where is this iron ore coming from? So if we click on this, right, it shows iron ore is coming in from Chicago, which means it's probably coming in from the Chicago Harbor, because we know where some of the iron mines are. We've also got the same thing with copper ore. We can look at that. So copper ore is coming in from all over. But the problem is, right, we're selling 905 pieces of copper. It's less than we're bringing in. And it says that bronze is not expensive. It's not a sought after good. We're not selling as much as we want to. So if I want to fix this, I might want to think about trying to make iron come in more and be produced more efficiently. But we don't know, right? So we've got the ore, we've got iron ore, we've got copper. We want to think about how to make this a bit more efficient. So if click on iron ore coming in from the harbor, click on copper ore coming in from all over the place, we can go try to find out where some of these mines that are producing the ore are coming from. So to do that, we want to go over, look here in buildings and production. So it has a number of filters. We can turn all of them on. We can see literally every building in the game. It is also showing buildings that are in like Alabama, right? I've got the Citadel in Lynchburg, Virginia. I've got the Virginia Military Institute, right? I've got the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. These are not in Union hands. These are just things that they're all the buildings in the entire game. So let's take the all filter off. We only want to look at mines, right? We want to look at the production of copper and iron specifically. So let's look for mines. Turn that on. This will populate we can see all of the mines all around the country. So we know that we're looking for iron and copper mines. We're looking for them close to Chicago. So I know exactly where they are for the most part. So Michigan Coalfields, right? Coal mine in Lansing, Michigan. Technically, it's closer to like St. John's, Michigan, but I say that as a Michigan native, so don't hold it against me. All right, we want to find... I was looking at this earlier, and I've got a couple of other things that I'm going to complain about a little bit too. Batchawana mines. I think this is... Oh, this produces copper as well. I didn't know that was there. Duluth Iron Mines, St. Paul, Minnesota. The Marquette Iron Mines in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And let's go take a look at that for a second. And let me complain as a Michigan native for the first time here about the geography of this game. Okay? The Upper Peninsula of Michigan belongs to Michigan. It's not part of Wisconsin. Marquette is in Michigan, not Wisconsin. It's not anywhere near, like, this is part of Michigan. I'm sorry if you're from Wisconsin and you think that the Upper Peninsula of Michigan should be part of Wisconsin, but it ain't. We fought a war over it, and it's ours, so we're going to keep it, okay? So, anyway, Marquette is in Michigan, and Marquette has the Marquette Iron Mines down here. So if we look more at the company information here, again, we get a similar panel that we had from last time. Now, this is a pretty efficient mine. It's operating at 200% of the capacity, the production, whatever abstract that means, right? It's producing 9.2 thousand pieces of iron ore. And we can also, again, click on the ore, and we can see where it's going. Now, if I zoom out from here, unfortunately, I'm going to lose this line. Right? It's going to disappear. So I can't actually tell exactly where that's going, but it's probably going to Fond du Lac. It might be coming into Milwaukee. It's likely at some point going to Chicago, right? So we have rail that goes to Chicago from there. It's connected pretty well by port and by rail, and lake travel capacity is pretty good. So I have a few more options in how I want to try to get this. Just to simplify things, we've chosen to try to increase the supply of iron ore rather than copper, just because iron is sold at a higher price. Right, so I want to try to increase the supply of iron going into Chicago. So I have a couple of options, right? I can upgrade this mine. So let's take a look at that for a sec, right? Upgrade to increase productivity of this building to 300% of basic production. It says it's currently at 100%, but it's also at 200%, right? So I'm going to use $3.9 million of the generated subsidies that I already have to upgrade this company. Now, what that means is that if you look down here on this panel, the subsidy funding panel, and I hover over it, I currently have $4.3 million of industrial subsidies accrued based on the allocation of the government budget. I need $3.9 million to upgrade this mine. So I can do that. If I hit upgrade, all of the money to upgrade this mine is going to come from accrued subsidies. This is money essentially that has already been spent. It's already set aside for industrial uses. It would cost me no money out of pocket. So if we look at finances again, right, this $19 million will be untouched. It'll stay there because the money that's in the accounts here doesn't come from my subsidies over here, right? So I've been, from the very beginning of the war, spending around at least $5 million, basically like per month, let's say, per year, to increase the amount of money in my industry budget, right? And I've been keeping that very high because I want more money in this budget, because I want to be able to do things just like this, to upgrade mines and to, make my industry more effective. So I have, again, $4.3 million in this budget. So if I wanted to, for free, right now, I could upgrade this mine, and I could get more iron produced in Marquette, Michigan, which will eventually get down to Chicago. We'll get down to that. We'll get down to this company here, the Foundries, I believe, right? And they should hopefully start operating a bit more efficiently. And I don't have a similar upgrade here. I can't just upgrade this building and hope that it goes well. I can't do it, right? So my options are basically increase the supply or make the transport network more efficient. And the way that I can do that is by upgrading the port. But if you look down here again, you can see the subsidy funding is a lot higher to upgrade the port. I need $17 million for my industry budget to upgrade this port. So right now I do not have that much money. It's going to take me a long time, more than a year, to build up $17 million that I can spend to upgrade this port. So that does not look like an option that I can pursue at the moment. But I can upgrade the iron mine. Now, this is an experimental campaign. This is something I'm just sort of testing out, and I want to keep our sort of variables limited. So I'm going to upgrade this mine, and we're going to check back in a month, a couple of months, a year, if the war is still going on, and we're going to see what, if anything has been done to help deal, or to, after I've upgraded this mine, to see if it has an overall effect on my economy. But there are other things we ought to worry about, right? The available workforce up here is only 10%. I don't have a whole lot of people working in this mine. And now mines don't need a whole lot of people, but, you know, it's something to keep in mind. It's already operating. You can't build new mines anywhere. That's one of the things you cannot build in this game. So, you know, my options are fairly limited. This mine is in a good place to be able to get to Chicago where it needs to go. But before I do that, let's see if we can find some other mines, maybe in an area that are a little bit more accessible. So Duluth iron mines here. Now this is producing fewer pieces of iron, but it has even less workforce, but it is close to a rail line. That's pretty good. The upgrade cost is exactly the same, right? $3.7 million to upgrade the Duluth iron mines. So that's another option. We've also got the Superior iron mines, which are over here. These are actually in Wisconsin, unlike the Marquette mines, right? These are producing less ore than either the Duluth iron mines or the Marquette iron mines. But again, close to the rail, and it costs the exact same amount of money to upgrade them, right? I've got the same problem over here with this foundry as well, right? We're producing about the same amount of iron ore and less bronze than copper. So eventually we're going to want to upgrade a copper mine as well. But for right now, we can kind of leave it. Okay, so looking a little further, it looks like probably what we should try to do is, rather than upgrade those mines that are up there along the lakes, we might want to think about trying to upgrade the mines that are a little bit closer to St. Paul along the rail line that will eventually get us to Chicago. Now, I'm still not 100% because there's, again, a workplace shortage, 9% available workforce, and that might make things a little bit more difficult, right? We've also got copper mines here, right? And the problem with this one, it's got more workforce. It's producing more iron ore than any of the other mines that we've looked at so far. It's got more workforce, but its transportation network is a little less visible, right? So I can look at this once again, and I can go look at all of this stuff that it's producing, right? Goods flow, iron ore. This is just pointing straight down, but again, the problem is as soon as I try to zip out to see where it's going, I can't see it anymore. So I assume, based on the trajectory, right? If I were to get out a compass, right, and look at where these things are going, where the iron ore is going, I think that's heading to Duluth. I think that's heading to, or Fond du Lac rather, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And from there is a rail hub that will take it all the way to Chicago. But it's going by boat first, and I'm unsure exactly how that works, to be quite honest. I don't know if that's efficient or not, or whatever. So I don't know. It's probably better to be right along a rail route, but Fond du Lac is a railhead. So I think I'm going to stick with my first instinct here, and I'm going to upgrade this mine here in Marquette, Michigan, not Wisconsin. I'm going to upgrade it, and we're going to see in a month or two, we're going to come back after some time has rolled, and we're going to see a little bit more about how this works, and we're going to double check on our Chicago foundries and see if that has made anything more efficient. Now, I may have made exactly the wrong choice. I might I might want to rethink everything that I've done. And if you're more familiar with how the economy works, in the comments, let me know. Because again, I'm mostly still trying to feel my way out through a lot of this economy stuff, and I know sort of how to navigate some of the problems, but I'm certainly no expert by any means. But my thoughts are, right, we look at our economy alerts again. We've got, again, iron production, 92,000 versus 171,000 demand. And by increasing the efficiency of at least this mine for now, we're going to at least make this another kind of third, again, as much production. So this is probably going to go up to like 12,000 pieces or something like that, which is not taking a big chunk out of the demand for that we already have for the foundries here. So, you know, this is going to be kind of a drop in the storm, a drop in the bucket. So we'll see how it works. But again, experimental campaign, I'm going to try to figure this stuff out just as much as all of you are too. So that's my brief aside, my brief tangent, my maybe not so brief tangent about how the economy works and how you can kind of wrap your head around some of the issues that you have with it. And in the meantime, there's more news from back east. The invasion of General Porterfield back to into Ohio has been beaten back. Porterfield actually, the news stories follow that, of course, it was our boy, the young Napoleon himself, George McClellan, that forced a march upon Porterfield and forced him out of Ohio. He retreated into Western Virginia and then took a rail over to Harper's Ferry. There was yet another battle outside Harper's Ferry, and our General Patterson handily beat him and drove him back into the secessionist lands deeper into Virginia. So that's triumphant. That's a really good. It's a crisis past. But in the meantime, of course, lots of political changes have happened. The crisis of having an enemy army sitting for literal months in Ohio has made a lot of the people who are even fairly sanguine about the chances of ending this war pretty quickly start rethinking things. So Lincoln has managed to pass a few more calls for more men and has reorganized some of the regular army as well. So we're sitting now at 2-year contracts, and we're about to pass a larger budget increase to send more money to our military, which should be able to unlock some more projects, to purchase some more weapons, and to reorganize how the army operates. So at the moment, it's August 1861. Historically, this is when, the Department of the West kind of folded into some larger armies that are operating around Tennessee, along the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. So we're still operating under the larger plan concocted by Winfield Scott that we're calling the Anaconda Plan, right? Eventually, what we'd like to do is seize control of the Mississippi River and capture New Orleans and essentially cut off the western part of the Confederacy, especially Texas and along the ports down here, from access to the rest of the rebellion. That's ideally what we'd like to do. Obviously, it's a lot harder than that, and we still have to worry about the fact that we still have an enemy army operating with impunity in southwestern Missouri. So we ought to get rid of that. And it's about time that Harney got a move on. The problem is, again, by moving so far away from St. Louis, we're presenting the opportunity for any other Confederate forces, including this Western Army. This is fairly fresh intelligence, by the way, so it looks like they probably are around Brownsville. That's only 3 days old. But we leave the risk open that they're going to try to come up and take St. Louis. So this is a risky move, and Harney is a little cautious. Harney doesn't really want to leave his base of supply. He doesn't want to leave this railhead. He doesn't want to leave St. Louis unprotected. But he doesn't really have a choice. We have to kick this army out of Missouri because we want as much state support in Missouri as possibly we can, because we get a lot of recruits from there. And we want to make sure that we're protecting our border states, because if Missouri falls, then Kentucky might fall. If Kentucky falls, Maryland might fall. And we don't want that, right? So, don't want to give any spoilers about what else is going on, but there is another Western Army that is currently forming, and hopefully after, if we're able to catch the secessionist army down here, the Missouri State Guard, and deal with it, we might see a little bit, we might see some more men coming into the West, and we might see a reorganization of the structure of command out here in St. Louis in Cairo, Illinois, and some other places. So let's get a move on. Let's get Harney moving. We're going to move down to Springfield, and we're going to see if we can locate and deal with the Missouri State Guard. Now, because, let's get time rolling here, because we know that Missouri State Guard is building a supply depot, they're probably stationary. This is information that's often you see the supply depots being built rather than actually the army. And that's fine. I'll take that. So we're going to keep these guys moving. I'm going to check back once we come into contact a little bit. I'm going to go back and check to make sure that things in the east are operating smoothly. And I don't have any crisis popping up in the middle of our campaign here. So I'll be right back. I checked back, and I don't think there are any impending crises, so we're going to stick with the Department of the West. We're going to increase the time here, and we're going to at least get to Springfield and see what's what. You can see that our speed is a lot slower than it normally is, and this is because we're no longer connected to rail. We have to march the entire way. All right, and here we go. So this is our little newspaper account telling us that our latest policy has been enacted. Now we have much more money to go to the military. So let me pause this real fast and show you exactly what that means. So again, come up here to policies. So we've gone from military 2. So this does several things. For one, the most important, it gives us much more room in our military budget. Right now it's sitting at 12.5 million. This is money that we're taking out of our budget per year and throwing at the military. Once we advance time a little bit, you'll see the difference, right? So again, 12.5 million right there. But this also opens up three different options. So we have one here, the Enrollment Act. So if we desperately needed more men, we have 125,000 roughly men in the army right now, and we have 2 other armies that are currently forming that will put this up to about 150,000 before too long. If we needed a lot more men, we could enforce the Enrollment Act. Now this is an act, not a policy. So if you look over here, our used policies, we have 3 out of 10. And so what that's counting is our militia track, our industry track, and our military track. If I were to, say, use civilian warships or the Regulars Act, they wouldn't count toward the used policies that I have because those are acts, not policies. So we can have as many acts active as we'd like. Policies, of course, we're limited right now to 10. That's also a budgetary issue, though. We can go up or down depending on what we want to do. So if we desperately need a lot more men, we could go with the Enrollment Act. The problem is that draftees are less enthusiastic about the war than volunteers, obviously, right? If we have a volunteer army, if we're putting out the call for 600,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion, all of the people that sign up as volunteers are going to be committed to the war. They're going to be ideologically motivated and politically motivated by ending the rebellion, at least, if not being committed abolitionists, like several of the men in our ranks already. So if we have draftees, these are people who don't want to be in the war. So they're going to actually make the national morale go down because there are going to be protests in the cities. There are going to be people who are resisting the draft. There are going to be people that are trying to politically agitate to end the draft, right? And they should. They absolutely should. A draft, a civilian draft is a horrible thing. But it speeds up the number of replacements that we get to cover attrition in our armies, which is really good. And it also opens up an entirely new track of, you're getting a brief little window here into some of my armies. So let's go to the Department of the West here, right? If I wanted to put another cavalry regiment in here, we have 55,000 current volunteers ready to go. And this would open up, if we did the Enrollment Act, this draft panel here, which would give us several more, tens of thousands more men that we can put in the army. But the draft brigades would have lower morale, lower leadership, and lower potential for improvement than our volunteers. So we maybe want to keep that in mind in case we end up becoming overpowered, by the Confederate armies. Right now, they're about keeping neck and neck with us in terms of recruitment. And we could, if we really went ham on recruitment, we could, by the end of this year, have about 300,000 men in arms. I've done that before in previous campaigns. It's possible. And it's actually about half of what the actual size of the United States Army was by the end of 1861. They got up to about 500,000 by the end of the first year, or even the first 8 months of the war, basically. It's probably possible to recruit that much if the only thing you invest in is recruitment. And I don't really want to do that. I have a lot of other things I need to worry about at the moment. So right now, I'm not super worried about being overpowered by Confederate manpower. So I don't think I'm going to look at the Enrollment Act. We could also do bounties. So we'd spend more money, but we'd get men of lesser quality because we're going to get people who are signing up for the Army because they're going to get an enlistment bonus. We're going to give them essentially like $100 or whatever as soon as they join. And that induces a lot of other people who otherwise wouldn't join the Army to join the Army, but it drags the volunteer unit's morale down by 5, which is not insignificant. So that's another thing we might want to keep in mind in case we need the manpower. But for right now, I'm going to say no, let's not do it. Now, here's another attractive option. We could go for emancipation. So emancipation, obviously, this means that all of the enslaved laborers, everyone enslaved in the southern states, in the states that are currently in rebellion, will be considered contraband of war. Which means that they are property that can be seized and used for the Union military. So in the war, stuff like this was already starting to happen. There were a couple of very early kind of localized regional emancipations that were proclaimed in various other places. Somewhat famously, John C. Fremont, when he got out to St. Louis, issued a similar sort of emancipatory proclamation. And Buford, who was part of an invasion along the coast of the South, similarly put out like an emancipation proclamation, and both were basically censured by the president. The president said, like, that ain't where we are right now. You can't be giving military orders, like, nationwide orders like you're a dictator. You can't do that. Obviously, Lincoln came around to change his mind by January of 1862. He had essentially changed his mind, and it took until Antietam, till almost the end of 1862, for him to release the actual Emancipation Proclamation. So again, I'm not that desperate for manpower. We don't really need to counteract the Union or the Confederate intervention score. It's not that high. We don't really need to worry about it right now. And again, our most popular leaders at the moment in the war are Democrats, are people who don't want to fight the war for emancipation. And so because this is sort of a narrative storytelling campaign, a role-playing campaign in some ways, I'm not going to do this quite yet. I'm going to wait until it looks like we need to in order to win the war. And that's how the radical Republicans ended up getting this to be accepted by the great majority of people in the country, was because the straits in the war were so dire that they absolutely thought that emancipating the enslaved workforce of the South was a war-winning strategy. And we're not quite there yet, right? So what other policies do we have? Well, we can get some regulars into our army. So this will actually add essentially a division of regulars from the regular army, and it'll put them into our armies. Now, the problem with this is that it takes our military experience down by 5, because the idea behind this is that once we started filling out volunteers, we took a lot of the officers and non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and the experienced men from the regular regiments and brigades and dispatched them kind of across the country into the volunteer units. This made the volunteer units a little bit sharper. It made them drill better. It gave them a little bit more experience and some veterancy there in the ranks. But it meant that we didn't really have this, this core of really experienced men. And now, at the beginning of the war, there were only 16,000 regulars, and if we actually do the Regulars Act, we get about 16,000 men. I think we get like 4 brigades, something like that, 4 or 5 brigades of regular soldiers. And they come with like unending contracts, and they come with a perk locked and loaded and ready to go. So this is something we might think about. We can also think about diplomacy. Diplomacy doesn't do much for us because we're not really worried about a foreign intervention at the moment. But it will give us access to higher subsidies for our diplomacy, which we're spending very little on right now. And that opens up some projects of importing Austrian rifles or British artillery or British rifles, that kind of thing, right? And some of these are actually quite attractive, and some of these we might want to think about using eventually. But for right now, I'm not super worried about diplomacy. We can invest in agriculture to get more funding available to put into our farms and things like that. And as you can see, if we look at our economy alerts, right, we could do with producing more crops, more flour, more food, more rice, more salt, pretty much everything involved with food, right? We could definitely use a lot more. Like our crop production right now is 130,000. It's almost half as much as the demand. So that could be super duper helpful. But what I think I'm going to go for here is funding. So I'm going to pass a policy that means that the government is it frees up some of its budgetary restrictions, and I can put a lot more money into the financial track of my the financial track of my subsidies bar here, which will give us a few more options in improving our credit rating, improving our markets, improving subsidizing our banks, improving all sorts of things that need to be improved to make our credit rating and get some of our interest rate and other things under control. So I believe that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for government funding, and in about a month we can check back and we can look at some of the policies that we might be able to invest in that way. But that's it for now, and we're going to get back to the action here. Listen to advance time by 20 times. And get the Department of the West moving. So, we've arrived at Springfield. We can again look and see how that's changing our front lines. And I think there are a couple of ways that we can deal with this right now. I can either kind of shoot up here to the north and come down to the Missouri State Guard on the south. And the idea behind this is I'll push them out of Missouri. Oh, but see, now I have to worry about the Western Army. This is also fresh intelligence. This is only a day old. The Western Army is actually marching quite quickly. And they came from Little Rock. Or Brownsville, I guess. They came up this road here. And they might be trying to head to St. Louis. So again, my caution was warranted. And I think that this is, more than anything, this is news that I should really pay attention to. And it should tell us that we need more men here in this side. If the Confederates have two armies operating in Missouri, they can very easily distract me with one and swoop around to try to attack St. Louis with another. So Harney here is actually going to beat feet. He's going to come back to Rolla, and we're going to try to get more intelligence about what's going on, because I don't want to be outflanked by this Western Army. I really don't want to have St. Louis threatened, and I might need to hop on a train and get back to St. Louis to deal with this threat. Now, luckily, it looks like, at least according to our intelligence, they only have 7,000 men. This is not an army that is much of a threat at all. And it looks like I am going to get into a battle here with McClellan and the Department of the Ohio against a couple of secessionist armies. So I'm going to go fight that battle off camera, and I will come back and return to the tribulations here of the Department of the West. I'll be right back. The crisis in the East has been attended to, and I'm back here with the Department of the West. And again, we're watching the Western Army attempt to steal a march on us. Now, fortunately, we've got a couple of advantages here. Not only do we have sort of the inside track, he has to sort of loop around these kind of dense woody roads in order to get to St. Louis. I'm also about to get to the railhead at Rolla, and I'll be able to ride the rail right into St. Louis, which is what I'm going to do. So they're moving quite quickly, and if I hadn't been paying attention to my information down here, and to be honest, I think, let's take a look at, get rid of the front lines, take a look at my intelligence heat map. I believe partially we've got some pretty dense coverage of a lot of intelligence around this area, and I think part of it is because I have this news agency that's able to report on enemy movements and various other things, right? So this is helping, I think. It's hard to be sure, right? Sometimes these heat maps aren't super duper accurate. It's difficult to be sure what's going on, but I believe that these little pockets of red here are reporting that I'm getting from all around that's being collected, collated, and disseminated to my commanders and everything because of that news agency in St. Louis. So that's something to pay attention to. And also, we have some more information about some other secessionist armies that are preparing along the Mississippi. So we've got a huge Confederate army getting ready, 27,000 men down here in Grenada. We've got the Army of Mississippi a little bit less. They've got, it looks like a single battalion of artillery that's forming up. And we've got the Western Army, of course, of 6,500 men coming to St. Louis. Luckily, I might let you in a little bit on this. In Indianapolis, we're actually forming Grant's Expeditionary Corps, which was actually started to get formed around August of 1861. So that might make its appearance here in the campaign quite soon. But let's get Harney up here on the railhead, and let's get him back to St. Louis. You can always make sure you have rail movement on so they don't try to just march around. I don't want to blunder into them. I want to be prepared, and I want to attack them at a place and a time of my choosing. So let's go. There we go. And we can see again the front lines changing. They're seizing towns. And importantly, if they don't move, if they're not actually coming at me in St. Louis, I'm going to have to come back and retake Fredericton because they have taken a lead mine from me, which I do not want them to have. So best case scenario, the Western Army here makes a really poorly thought out attempt to attack the Department of the West in St. Louis. And I beat them back and retake Fredericton. Worst news is they sit and wait. They're building a supply depot. That's what it looks like. So it looks like I'm going to have to go attack them. And because Missouri State Guard is so far away, I doubt they'll be able to get here and threaten St. Louis in the time it's going to take me to get down here and attack this Western Army. So I'm just going to go straight for it. I'm going to go get them. And we should have another battle this episode. Again, right before you engage, it's always a good idea to check up and see that you haven't been misled by any of the intelligence that you have so far. It still says they've got about 7,000 men. I wouldn't be surprised if they just straight up retreat. But we'll see. I've also got my bonds issued here. My credit rating is still not super good. So hopefully I can attend to that pretty quickly here with my... Oh, there we go. So, all right, I'm going to stop Harney because the Western Army is here on the road. And yep, they are withdrawing from me. They actually have much fewer men than my intelligence had predicted. They're marching away. I'm going to march to Fredericton at the very least. Even if that leaves me a little bit open, they're withdrawing, so they're not likely to be able to reform and threaten St. Louis in the time it's going to take to do that. Actually, I'm not going to march there because I've already retaken it. So I'm going to halt them. This the Rolla Depot, yeah, has clicked over to Union control once again. And there we have it. I mean, driving away the Western Army is okay. I still desperately need more men. I need more armies. I need flexible, sort of quick reaction forces. I need all sorts of other more flexible things here in this theater in order to be as successful as I want to be. I still need to deal with the Missouri State Guard. That's still, you know, a somewhat large and potent force that's occupying southwestern Missouri. I'd really like to get rid of them. But as we can kind of see here, we've got the rear guard action happening. So the forces are skirmishing in between. His rear guard is clashing with my vanguard. We're both trying to kind of shove each other around. And, you know, I want to... you want to pay attention to that because that will actually bring in more wounded and sick soldiers as you're operating around. So it's important for you to pay attention to that kind of thing as it comes up. Now, it looks like these guys are probably heading to Rolla. So I'm going to try to beat them there because I don't want them to take that supply depot again. I want to keep the railhead secure. And the railhead, this is a pretty good base of operations for my forces at the moment. I can quickly retreat back to St. Louis if I need to. And it lets me kind of take a forward post here that I can use to operate against the various Confederate forces in the state. So let's move them over there. I may not beat them there. I might actually force them into another retreat as they get there. Oh, and they've withdrawn. So once again, they're moving pretty quick to get away from me here. And I'll take that. That's just fine. Now, if you recall last time, we had to do some manpower shifting to make sure that our brigades here were up to full strength. And my artillery is sadly under strength. So I've drafted in Jesse Reno here with just a new draft of men. So I'm going to get these, I'm going to stuff these guys into my other artillery battalions to get them up to full strength. Looks like they are. And so I'm going to transfer Reno. I have set up, and I will set up a similar Western one. I have set up what I call a Corps of Instruction. And a Corps of Instruction is basically, I use it to draft in new units. As they're kind of sitting there, you know, for a month or two, they get a little bit of practice. They get a little bit of drill going. They're able to become slightly less green when they actually get to the field. And transferring from a Corps of Instruction out to a field army is a lot faster than recruiting straight into a field army. I can also concentrate on recruiting regiments, brigades from nearby states, putting them in the Corps of Instruction, and then throwing them into the Department of the West. So what I'm actually going to do, it's about the right time for it, historically. And I think it's about the right time for it here in the campaign as well. This will probably be the last thing I do for this episode. It doesn't look like we're going to get a battle today in the Western Theater, but that's all right. What I'm going to do is go to my military panel. I'm going to hit recruit a new army. I'm going to pick... Oh, looks like I can't in Missouri. Let's see. Make sure all is selected here. Oh, no, I can't. So I guess I'm going to pick Illinois. I'm going to raise a new army in Illinois. I do like George Gordon Meade, but I think I'm going to replace him. I'm going to replace him with Lieutenant Colonel John Fremont. Now, John Fremont did get assigned to the Western Theater in about July, August 1861. So this is somewhat historically accurate. Now, at the moment, he's just going to be in charge of what I'm going to call, again, the Mississippi Corps of Instruction. And the Mississippi Corps of Instruction is essentially going to be a tiny, tiny, tiny corps that I'm going to use to recruit Iowa, Illinois, possibly Indiana, Kansas, and Missouri brigades to keep my Western Department moving, and to keep my Western Department equipped, supplied with fresh soldiers, and also as a sort of secondary guard in St. Louis against those same sort of little quick raids that the Confederates are going to try to throw at me. So I'm going to put in him. This is the sort of basic kind of Corps of Instruction that I do in most of my campaigns. I'm going to add 2 divisions, and with the Corps of Instruction, what I'm mostly looking for are men with administration things. And it doesn't matter if they're captains or lieutenants, because the happiness of the brigades within the Corps of Instruction honestly doesn't matter at all. What I mostly want them, I'd like to find administrators with 3 or more pips. And that's just going to help. It's going to make sure that the men get supplied quicker, and it's going to give them a tiny bit more training by the time, for in the month or 2 that they're going to be sitting around before they get dispatched out to an army or a corps that's actually in the field. And you can see we're sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to these guys. Most of the people have 2 pips of administrative skill, and I know there are a handful that have more. And since that's like really the only thing I'm looking for, right, it might take kind of a while. So let me, I'm just going to, stop the recording. I'm going to come back when I've actually found a couple of people that I think are suitable. We have found our division commanders. So I've taken John Wool. John Wool, as you recall, was our brigadier general of the 1st Iowa here in our Department of the West. And I've decided to make him a division commander of the, you'll see this change, the name will change once we've kind of clicked away, but it is the Mississippi Corps of Instruction. So Wool's going to be our 1st division commander, and our 2nd division commander is Edward Canby, who also has 3 admin stars. And so we are all set for this. So what I'm going to do is put just a couple of brigades in each of these divisions. You have to have at least 1 in order to make sure that the thing doesn't disappear as soon as you click away from the thing. So we have almost 60,000 volunteers ready to go in here. But remember, I want to take mostly guys from essentially the West. So maybe Wisconsin. I haven't recruited too hard in Wisconsin. And Iowa, Missouri, other states around this area. Make sure the filter says all so you can find them all. So anyway, let's go back up. So we've got Iowa. We can do a mid-sized brigade from Iowa. So let's get them in here. We can do almost a mid-sized one from Illinois, but I'll forego that for now. Don't want to take too many from Kentucky. 66% state support, not super good. Let's see, where's Missouri? I've got 1,400 available men in Missouri. I basically picked clean a lot of the regions over here. This was a part of raising the other armies in the area, which we'll find out probably next episode. The Corps of Instruction, at least for now, is complete. I've got a couple of, I've got 4 regiments, 4 brigades, excuse me, training up. I've got John C. Fremont in here. And now let's see where he is, right? I selected Illinois as my place of formation. So he's over here in Quincy, Illinois. And I actually want to move him to St. Louis. So I'm going to order him, actually, I'm going to order him not to move by rail, but by river. And because, let's see if he actually moves. He will move. Because right now it's basically 3 officers and recruiting, he can move as long as it's on friendly territory, even if his readiness is low. So he's going to move to St. Louis. Once we have him there, we'll take another look at a few other things that I want to bring in now that Fremont has arrived in St. Louis. Now, historically, Fremont was in charge of, well, he came over to replace some of the officers that were in St. Louis. He clashed with a lot of the local kind of egos and was a somewhat divisive figure in St. Louis. He was one of the people who issued essentially a early emancipation proclamation in the region in which he was involved that was forced by Abe Lincoln to be retracted. So he's another one of these sort of abolitionist figures, these kind of friendly to the abolitionist cause or the radical Republican cause, even if he's not entirely committed to it. But among some of the more interesting things that I think this game brings in is that John Fremont was one of the men involved in the Hall Carbine fiasco, or the Hall Carbine controversy, as they called it. And now this game actually points to it. This game has the Hall Carbine in the game. And it says a little bit here, right? It talks about the head of the Ordnance Bureau. It gets a couple of details wrong, but I like how it kind of goes through it, right? So if you read the tooltip here, it essentially says that this was basically a scam by some arms agents to scam the government out of money. And it wasn't quite that simple. It's a really fun and attractive story to talk about how poor and inefficient the government is. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I think it's a lot more interesting. So if you read about the Hall Carbine controversy, as it's called, one of the names that actually pops up is J.P. Morgan, the banker. He was, of course, sort of an early banker at the time, and he was actually involved in what they called the Hall Carbine controversy. And the short story is that the head of the Ordnance Bureau, a guy named Ripley, was contacted by another guy named Eastman. Eastman offered to buy the old defunct Hall rifles and Hall carbines and modernize them. He said, hey, I'm going to buy these for cheap. I'm going to improve them, and I can sell them back to the government so that they're more useful on the battlefield. This was around July, August 1861. This was after Bull Run. This was when there was panic in Washington, and there were arms dealers and arms agents and people flooding the streets, all trying to make a buck. Ripley told Eastman, I'm not that interested. And then Eastman came back and said, hey, well, what if I just buy them from you so that I can distribute them to some volunteer regiments and everything? And this was a way that the Ordnance Bureau could make a bit of cash and could dispense with some mothballed old weapons that the Army wasn't going to find use for anymore. And so Ripley agreed. He sold them to Eastman. Now, the problem was that Eastman was operating on spec. He didn't have any money. So what he had to do in order to pay for the hulls that he was purchasing, about 5,000 of them, for about $3.50 a piece, he had to go get a loan. So he went and he found a guy to give him a loan. This guy's name was Stevens. Now, Stevens gave him a $20,000 loan, but it turns out Stevens also didn't have the money. So Stevens got a loan, another $20,000 loan, from JP Morgan. So JP Morgan gave him the loan. JP Morgan kept the security of the carbines as part of the deal. And this whole thing was sort of operated. And eventually Stevens was able to find John C. Fremont in St. Louis, who was interested in buying the carbines. And now along the way, because these were passed from middleman to middleman, the cost of them had gone from $3.50 a piece to $22, and they were sold to John C. Fremont, who was using a government budget to buy them, which means that the government sold them initially to Eastman for $3.50 and bought them back essentially from Eastman for $22. This became controversial, and it immediately had a congressional inquiry to find out what the hell had happened and if there was any corruption involved. They ended up finding out there's not really too much corruption, but the second middleman, Stevens, ended up getting squeezed out and didn't make any money. JP Morgan was only involved sort of tangentially, but it became part of the folklore of JP Morgan that he made a big chunk of his first, his initial fortune came from bilking the government during a time of crisis. And this kind of came in around 1910 or so, in the backlash against the robber barons, as they were called, right? So it's not quite true that JP Morgan purposely went out and bilked the government, but I do really like how this game sort of points to that. And the way that this works mechanically, and I'm going to purchase it because I think it's fun, is that once you purchase this project, rather than all the other projects, we already looked at Legacy Rifles and we looked at Springfields. Once you purchase those projects, you can start producing these weapons. But the hulls, you can't. So once you appoint the project, once I've purchased the hull carbines, I have to go into the military panel and look at weapons. And I will just have 2,500 hull carbines and 3,000 hull rifles. That's it. That's all I'm ever getting is just about 5,000 hull rifles and carbines that I can distribute. No, production ceased. They're not produced. I can't build anymore. I can't order anymore. All I can do is distribute these 3,000 weapons, these 5,000 weapons, to men who are already in the field. And because John C. Fremont bought them historically, and John C. Fremont is operating out of St. Louis right now, these are going to go into my Department of the West. So these are not super great weapons. I honestly think they give an 8 per minute rate of fire, which is ridiculous. There's no way you can fire this 8 times a minute. These are so goofy. I'm going to try to find some videos of these things being fired. I've never come across them. There's some videos on Forgotten Weapons that they show kind of the workings and the mechanics of the Hall rifle, but I haven't seen too many people fire them. And one of the reasons is because the way that it's technically a breech loader, but the breech actually pops out of above the trigger assembly. The whole breech kind of lifts out, and you load from the muzzle of the breech. You fill this little chamber with powder and you put a ball in, and the ball is just a bit larger than the barrel. And that gets kind of put down into the breech of the barrel. And then when you fire it, the ball goes obviously through the rifling and everything. And the problem is that because there's a poor seal, and because that whole breech lifts out of the rifle, the gas seal is very poor. And this is before they were starting to use India rubber and other things to seal up gas, like the dry needle rifle eventually used. So the sealant, it ended up basically hotboxing everybody as soon as they started firing. They'd shoot and this huge gas escape would come out near their face, and they were quite unpopular rifles, but they had been used in the Mexican-American War. And there are some rumors that soldiers in the Mexican War would take out the entire breech assembly, which included the lock and the trigger mechanism, and walk around the streets of Mexico with them loaded like a little personal pistol. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I've read about it in a couple of different places, and I think it's kind of a funny story. So in any case, these are not great rifles, and I think the game is a little too favorable to them. I think these should maybe fire 5 a minute, maybe, not 8 at all. But they're okay. And you can also see that, like, if you're aware of the story of the Hall carbine, or the Hall rifle, the Hall carbine controversy, the fact that we're paying $900 a piece for the rifles is ludicrous. Like, it was politically controversial that these had been bought at $22 a piece, and they were sold from the government armories at $3.50. So one thing I'd really like to see is eventually, once the game sort of stabilizes a lot of its economic things, is really taking a look at the prices of the weapons, because these are orders of magnitude more expensive than they would have been in the 1860s. But anyway, now that we've got that aside, I'm going to distribute these weapons amongst some of the men in the Department of the West, because why not? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Grierson, because he's already got some experience, I'm going to give Grierson some Hall carbines, and he's going to get the carbines. He's got them all. And I'm going to give Lyons, already got some rifles. Wallace here is going to get the Hall rifles. Oh, he can't for some reason. That's bizarre. Maybe I need a smaller brigade to get them. Let's see, Tidbull here. Okay, Tidbull can get them. I might fiddle with this a little bit. I don't think it makes much sense that somebody with fewer than 3,000 can not operate them. And I'd actually like Wallace to have them. Huh. Next episode, we're also going to talk a little bit about Wallace and his actual real life history, because he's a really fascinating figure. I've actually read quite a few of his letters. He's a super duper fascinating guy. And actually, the sort of storyline we gave from the last episode about how, you know, these Illinois regiments went back and re-elected their officers. Like, Wallace was actually elected as the colonel of the regiment that he had, the 11th Illinois Regiment, as he was as he joined the army, which I think is kind of, I didn't know that at the time, but I think that's kind of a funny coincidence. But yeah, he was a really interesting guy. He ended up being part of Grant's Army of Tennessee. He fought at Shiloh, and he was mortally wounded at Shiloh. But we'll talk a little bit more about him in the next episode. For now, I think I'm going to essentially call it for this episode. We've got some changes coming up to the Department of the West. We've got Fremont heading into St. Louis. We've got some more news coming from back east. And I'm going to have to fiddle with some economics. I really hope that I can get my credit rating up from BBB minus, because I wouldn't like that to go any lower if possible. And a lot of this is exacerbated mostly because I've just put in something like 40 to 50,000 new men in the army, and all of that is terribly expensive. So until next time, again, I really hope you're enjoying this little campaign. I'm enjoying this campaign. I think this is pretty fun. So let me know if you have any questions about anything you'd like to see, any questions about the mechanics of the game, or how supply works, or how leadership works, or anything like that. I'd be happy to take a closer look at it for you. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.